The shuttle shook as it passed through the energy shields of the massive Zervani flagship. Commander Jake Morrison gripped the armrest of his seat and tried to keep his breathing steady. He had been in space for 12 years. He had survived battles, pirates, and one very close call with a black hole. But nothing made him more nervous than what waited for him on the other side of that airlock. His wife Laura sat beside him, calm as still water. She was reading something on her tablet, occasionally swiping to the next page. Anyone watching would think she was heading to a vacation, not into the den of the most dangerous alien warlord in 3 sectors. Jake looked at her and felt a mix of love and wonder. Laura was small. She stood barely 5'4", with auburn hair she always kept tied back and gray eyes that missed nothing. She looked like a schoolteacher or a librarian. She was neither of those things. Before they married, she had worked in places that did not officially exist, doing jobs that would never appear in any record. She had retired 5 years ago, or so she claimed. The shuttle pilot announced their arrival. Jake stood and straightened his uniform. The blue and silver colors of the Galactic Coalition felt thin against what was coming. Lavra put away her tablet and stood beside him. She reached out and adjusted his collar, smoothing a wrinkle he had not noticed. He asked her if she was ready. She smiled and said she was always ready. The airlock opened with a hiss of pressure. Cold air rushed in, carrying a smell like copper and smoke. Jake stepped forward onto the deck of the Zervani flagship. The docking bay was enormous, big enough to hold a dozen Earth shuttles with room to spare. The walls were black metal covered in strange symbols. Zervani warriors stood in rows, watching the 2 humans with eyes that held no welcome. The Zervani were terrifying to look at. They stood 8 feet tall on average, covered in scales the color of dark stone. Each one had 4 arms, 2 large and 2 smaller, all ending in clawed hands. Their faces were flat, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern and mouths full of sharp teeth. They were built for war, and they had been fighting wars longer than humanity had existed. A Zervani officer approached. He was slightly smaller than the others, wearing armor marked with gold lines that indicated his rank. He spoke in the guttural language of his people, and Jake's translator struggled to keep up. The officer said they were to follow him. The warlord was waiting. The warlord did not like to wait. Jake nodded and began walking. Lavra fell into step beside him, her eyes moving constantly, taking in every detail of their surroundings. Jake knew she was counting guards, noting exits, and calculating distances. She could not help it. It was how she saw the world. They walked through corridors lit by red light. Other Zervani passed them, some stopping to stare, others ignoring them entirely. Jake heard whispers in the alien language. His translator caught fragments. Soft ones, prey animals, dead within the cycle. He tried not to react. The command deck was at the heart of the ship. A vast circular room filled with holographic displays and control stations. Zervani officers worked at their posts, monitoring ship systems and communications. The air was thick with tension. At the center of it all sat Warlord Crixton. He was larger than any Zervani Jake had ever seen, nearly 9 feet tall, even while seated on his command throne. His scales were darker than his subordinates, so black they seemed to absorb the light around them. A jagged scar ran across his face, cutting through 2 of his 4 eyes, which had been replaced with glowing red mechanical implants. He looked at Jake the way a predator looks at something too small to be worth eating. Crixton spoke. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. He said he had not requested a human liaison. The Galactic Coalition had forced this arrangement upon him as a condition of their treaty. He would tolerate the human presence. He would not welcome it. If the humans died aboard his ship, that was their own concern. Jake took a breath and began his prepared speech. He talked about cooperation between species, about mutual benefit, about the shared future of the coalition. He had practiced these words for weeks. Crixton interrupted him. He said he had heard enough diplomatic noise to last several lifetimes. He asked Jake one question. Could the human fight? Jake hesitated. He had combat training, yes. All coalition officers did. But he was no soldier. His skills were in communication, in negotiation, in finding common ground. Before he could answer, Crixton turned his attention to Laura. He asked who the female was. Jake explained that she was his wife. She had insisted on accompanying him. The coalition had tried to refuse, but Laura had connections. Crixton made a sound that might have been amusement or contempt. He said the human had brought his mate to protect him. How sweet. How typical of the weak. Laura spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet but clear. She said she was not there to protect anyone. She was there because she chose to be. And she suggested that the warlord not make assumptions about what she could or could not do. The command deck went silent. Zovani officers turned to stare. No one spoke to Crixton that way. No one. The warlord leaned forward on his throne, all four eyes now fixed on Laura. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he made that sound again, the one that might have been laughter. He told them they were dismissed. Quarters had been prepared. They would receive their duties tomorrow. He suggested they enjoy their first night, because things would become much harder. The gold-marked officer led them away from the command deck. Jake did not relax until they were 3 corridors away. He asked Laura if she had lost her mind. Speaking to the warlord like that. Laura shrugged. She said someone had to set expectations early. If they showed weakness now, the Zovani would never respect them. Better to be bold than to be dismissed. Jake shook his head. He had married a remarkable woman. He just hoped her boldness would not get them killed. Their quarters were small but functional. 2 rooms connected by a narrow corridor. The furniture was too large for humans, designed for Zervani bodies. Jake sat on the edge of the bed, which was hard as stone, and tried to process everything that had happened. Laura sat beside him. She took his hand and told him they would be fine. They had faced worse odds before. Jake was not sure that was true. But looking at her, seeing the confidence in her gray eyes, he almost believed it. Outside, the Zervani flagship moved through space, carrying them deeper into unknown territory. Somewhere on this ship, Warlord Crixton was watching, waiting, judging. Jake did not know what the future held. He only knew that whatever came next, he would face it with Laura at his side. That would have to be enough. The first week aboard the Zervani flagship was harder than Jake had imagined. The alien crew treated him like he did not exist. When he walked into a room, conversations stopped. When he asked questions, officers turned away. When he tried to attend planning meetings, guards blocked his path. He spent most of his time alone in his quarters, reading reports that were weeks old and writing messages to Coalition Command that felt increasingly pointless. He was supposed to be building bridges between species. Instead, he was invisible. Laura handled things differently. She woke early each morning and explored the ship. She found the training halls where Zovani warriors practiced combat. She found the mess halls where officers ate strange foods and argued in loud voices. She watched everything, learning the rhythms of the ship, the social hierarchies, the unspoken rules. The Zervani noticed her watching. Some found it amusing. Others found it annoying. A few found it interesting. On the 8th day, something changed. Jake had finally convinced a junior officer to let him observe a tactical briefing. He stood at the back of the room, trying to follow the rapid Zervani discussion about patrol routes and supply lines. His translator struggled with the military terminology. Laura stood beside him, silent and alert. The doors to the briefing room burst open. A Zervani warrior stormed in, pushing past the guards. He was large, even by Zervani standards, his scales marked with ritual scars that showed he had killed many enemies. His 4 eyes were wild with rage. He screamed in his native language. Jake's translator caught the words a moment later. The warrior was demanding to know why humans were allowed on the sacred ship. He called them vermin, parasites, a disease that needed to be cut out before it spread. The officers in the room shifted uncomfortably. Some seemed to agree with the warrior. Others looked worried. No one moved to stop him. The warrior pulled a ceremonial blade from his belt. It was curved and long, designed for cutting through armor. He pointed it at Jake and announced his intention. He would purify the ship by removing the human contamination himself. Jake's training kicked in. He shifted his weight, raising his hands in a defensive position. He knew he was outmatched. The Zervani was faster, stronger, and armed. Jake had nothing but his fists and a few years of basic combat instruction. The warrior charged. Time seemed to slow down. Jake saw the blade coming, saw the hate in those alien eyes, saw his own death rushing toward him. Then Lara moved. She was between them so fast that Jake barely registered the motion. Her small body twisted, redirecting the warrior's momentum. Her hands found the joints in his arm, the pressure points beneath his scales. She moved like water flowing around a stone. The warrior swung again. Lara ducked beneath the blade and struck twice, her fists connecting with nerve clusters that even Zervani armor could not protect. The warrior stumbled. She did not give him time to recover. She grabbed his weapon arm and twisted, using his own weight against him. There was a sound like cracking stone as something in his shoulder gave way. The blade fell from his grip. Lara kicked it aside and drove her elbow into the back of his knee. The massive warrior collapsed to the deck with a crash that shook the room. She stood over him, not even breathing hard. The whole fight had lasted less than 5 seconds. The briefing room was completely silent. Every Zervani in the room stared at the small human female who had just defeated one of their warriors with her bare hands. Jake stared too. He had known Lara was capable. He had seen hints of her skills over the years. But he had never seen her like this. Never seen the full extent of what she could do. Heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor. The crowd parted as Warlord Crixton entered the room. He looked at the unconscious warrior on the floor, then at Lara standing above him. His mechanical eyes glowed brighter. He asked what had happened here. An officer began to explain, stumbling over his words. The warrior had attacked the human liaison. The female had intervened. Crixton raised one of his 4 hands, silencing the officer. He looked directly at Lara and asked who she really was. He said he had seen warriors train for decades without achieving what she had just done. Lara met his gaze without flinching. She told him she was Jake's wife, just as she had said before. She was also someone who had spent her life learning how to survive against stronger opponents. Humans did not have scales or floor or forearms. They had to find other ways to win. Crixton considered her words. The room remained frozen, waiting for his judgment. Finally, he spoke. He said the warrior on the floor had brought shame upon himself. He had attacked an unarmed diplomat in a room full of witnesses. He had been defeated by a creature half his size. He would be stripped of his honors and reassigned to maintenance duty. Then Crixton turned to Lara. He said she had proven something today. He did not say what, but there was something different in his voice, something that might have been respect. He ordered the room cleared. The briefing was over. Everyone was to return to their duties. As the Zervani filed out, many of them looked at Lara with new eyes. They had expected humans to be weak, soft, easy to break. This female had shown them something else. Jake waited until they were alone in the corridor before speaking. He asked Lara where she had learned to fight like that. She smiled and said she had learned in places that did not appear on any map. She had learned because she had no choice. When you were small and the world was full of things that wanted to hurt you, you either learned to protect yourself or you did not survive. Jake took her hand. He told her she was terrifying. She laughed softly. She said she preferred the word prepared. They walked back to their quarters together. Behind them, the story was already spreading through the ship. The human female had defeated a HFY warrior in single combat. She had moved like nothing they had ever seen. She was small, yes, but she was not weak. That night, Jake lay awake thinking about what had happened. He had come to this ship expecting to be the important one, the diplomat, the bridge builder. Instead, his wife had done more in 5 seconds than he had accomplished in 8 days. He was not jealous. He was grateful. He was also beginning to understand that this mission might succeed, but not in the way anyone had expected. Laura slept peacefully beside him, her breathing slow and even. She looked so ordinary when she was at rest, so gentle. It was easy to forget what she was capable of. Jake suspected the HFY would not forget. He suspected Warlord Crix then would not forget either. Something had shifted today. The balance of power had changed in ways that were still unclear. All Jake knew for certain was that nothing would be the same after this. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities. And whatever came, Laura would be there beside him, ready for anything. That was more than enough. 3 weeks had passed since Laura defeated the HFY warrior. In that time, everything had changed. The crew no longer ignored Jake. They did not exactly welcome him either, but they acknowledged his presence. Officers nodded when he passed in the corridors. Guards stepped aside when he approached. It was not friendship, but it was progress. Laura had become something unexpected. Word of her victory had spread through every deck of the massive ship. Warriors who had laughed at humans now watched her with careful attention. Some approached her, asking about human fighting techniques. She answered their questions honestly, showing them how humans compensated for their physical limits through speed, precision, and knowledge of anatomy. She began training with small groups in the lower combat halls. The sessions drew larger crowds each day. HFY warriors twice her size learned to respect her skill. They did not always understand her methods, but they could not argue with results. Warlord Crix then observed these sessions, but said nothing. His mechanical eyes tracked Laura's movements with interest that Jake could not read. Whatever the warlord was thinking, he kept it to himself. The turning point came on a day like any other. Jake was in the communication center, reviewing trade agreements between the Coalition and the HFY Empire. The work was tedious but important. Every detail mattered in diplomacy. An alarm cut through the quiet. Red lights flashed along the walls. Officers rushed to their stations with urgent voices. Jake found the senior communications officer and asked what was happening. The officer explained quickly. A distress signal had been received from a mining colony in neutral space. The colony had been attacked by raiders from a faction called the Endless Dark. These raiders were pirates, killers, the worst kind of criminals. They preyed on isolated settlements, taking everything of value and leaving no survivors. The colony had 3,000 inhabitants. Men, women, children. Without help, they would all die. Jake's heart raced. He asked if the flagship would respond. The officer shook his head. That was not his decision. That was for the warlord to decide. Jake ran to the command deck. Laura was already there, standing at the edge of the room. She had heard the alarm, too. Crixton sat on his throne, listening to reports from his officers. His expression was cold, calculating. When the reports finished, he made his decision. The colony was in neutral space. The Zorvani had no treaty obligations to protect it. Intervening would risk Zorvani lives for alien strangers. The distress signal would be logged, but the flagship would not respond. Jake stepped forward. He knew he was crossing a line, but he could not stay silent. He argued that the coalition expected them to help those in need. He said 3,000 lives were worth the risk. He appealed to honor, to duty, to basic decency. Crixton listened without expression. When Jake finished, the warlord spoke in a voice like grinding stone. He said the humans talk constantly about cooperation and alliance. But what had humans ever done for the Zorvani? What had humans ever sacrificed? The coalition asked for everything and gave nothing in return. Why should Zorvani warriors die for people who would not do the same for them? Jake had no answer. The warlord was right. Humans had taken far more from this alliance than they had given. All his diplomatic words felt hollow. Laura stepped forward. Her voice was calm and clear. She said she understood the warlord's position. She said he was right that humans had not proven themselves worthy of sacrifice. But she offered him a way to test that worth. She invoked an ancient Zorvani custom called the Right of Challenge. She had learned about it during her research on Zorvani culture. The right allowed any warrior to challenge a commander's decision through single combat. If the challenger won, the commander was honor-bound to reverse their choice. The command deck erupted in angry voices. Zorvani officers shouted in outrage. A human invoking sacred tradition was unthinkable, offensive, impossible. Crixton raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. He studied Lavra for a long moment. Then he asked if she truly understood what she was proposing. The right of challenge was fought without mercy. Death was common. Did she wish to die for strangers she had never met? Lavra answered without hesitation. She said she was not planning to die. She was planning to win. And she was planning to show the Zorvani that humans were worth fighting beside. Crixton's mechanical eyes glowed brighter. He said he would honor the ancient tradition. His champion would fight the human female at dawn. If she won, the flagship would respond to the distress signal. If she lost, her body would be cast into space as a reminder that humans should know their place. Jake grabbed Laura's arm after they left the command deck. He was shaking. He asked her what she was thinking, what she was doing, how she expected to survive. Lavra took his hands in hers. She looked into his eyes with absolute certainty. She told him she had faced worse odds before. She told him those people in the colony deserved a chance. She told him this was why she had come on this mission, not just to stand beside him, but to do something that mattered. Jake wanted to argue. He wanted to beg her to withdraw the challenge. But he knew her better than that. Once Laura made a decision, nothing could change it. He asked who the champion would be. Laura had already found out. The champion was a warrior named Vergath. He was undefeated in 300 duels. He stood nearly 9 feet tall. He had killed more enemies than anyone could count. Jake felt his stomach drop. He asked how she could possibly beat someone like that. Laura smiled. She said size was not everything. Speed and intelligence could defeat strength. Patience could defeat power. She had spent her entire life proving that small did not mean weak. She kissed him gently. She told him to trust her. She told him to be ready when she won. Jake spent that night unable to sleep. He watched Lavra prepare, stretching her muscles, checking her equipment, meditating in silence. She seemed perfectly calm, as if tomorrow was just another day. He wished he could feel the same. All he felt was fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of failing the colony. Fear of what would happen if everything went wrong. But mixed with the fear was something else. Pride. Pride in his wife. In her courage. In her willingness to risk everything for people she had never met. Whatever happened tomorrow, Jake knew one thing for certain. He had married an extraordinary woman. Dawn would reveal whether that was enough. The combat arena was the largest room Jake had seen on the Zorvani flagship. It was circular, surrounded by rising seats filled with warriors eager to watch a human die. The floor was dark metal, scarred by countless battles. The air smelled of old blood. Jake stood in the observation section, his hands gripping the rail so hard his knuckles turned white. Beside him, Warlord Crixton sat on a raised platform, watching with his 4 glowing eyes. Lavra walked into the arena wearing simple combat clothes. She carried a standard knife, nothing more. She looked impossibly small against the massive space around her. From the opposite entrance came VOR single quotes Gath. The Zorvani champion was a mountain of muscle and scales. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his body covered in ceremonial scars that told the story of 300 victories. He carried 2 curved blades, one in each of his upper hands. His lower hands were bare, ready to grab and crush. The crowd roared with anticipation. They had come to see blood. They expected the human to fall within seconds. An elder Zorvani announced the rules. The duel would continue until one fighter could not continue. Death was permitted, but not required. The winner would have their demand honored. Vergath laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. He called Lara a tiny creature, a pet that had wandered away from its master. He promised to make her death quick, as a kindness. Laura said nothing. She watched him the way a hawk watches a mouse, patient and focused. The signal came. The duel began. Vergath charged immediately, crossing the distance in 3 massive strides. His blades swung in deadly arcs, fast enough to cut through steel. Any one of those blows would kill instantly. Lavra was not there to receive them. She moved like water, flowing around his attacks, never meeting force with force. She dodged left, then right, then back, always staying just outside his reach. Vergath grew frustrated and swung harder. Faster. Lara let him. Jake watched with his heart in his throat. He understood what she was doing. Vergath was powerful, but that power cost energy. Every missed attack drained him slightly. Every wasted motion brought him closer to exhaustion. Lavra was not fighting him. She was waiting. 3 minutes passed. Vergath was breathing harder now. His movements were slightly slower. The crowd had gone quiet, confused by a duel that refused to follow the expected pattern. Vergath changed tactics. He stopped chasing and planted his feet, waiting for Lara to attack. His 4 eyes tracked her movements, looking for any opening. Lavra circled him slowly. Then she feinted left and darted right, her knife flashing toward his knee joint. Vergath blocked, but barely. She was already gone before his counterstrike could land. She did it again. And again. Each time, her blade found small targets, joints, and gaps in his natural armor, places where pain could accumulate. None of the wounds were serious alone. Together, they were wearing him down. 5 minutes. 6 minutes. Vergath was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. His breathing was ragged. His movements were desperate. Lavra had not been touched once. The crowd was no longer cheering for Vergath. Some had begun cheering for the human. They could recognize skill when they saw it. This tiny creature was dismantling their champion piece by piece. At the 7-minute mark, Vergath made a fatal mistake. He lunged with all his remaining strength, putting everything into one killing blow. Lavra had been waiting for exactly that. She stepped inside his reach, too close for his blades to work effectively. Her knife found the gap between his helmet and chestplate, the small vulnerable space that even Zorvani armor could not protect. She struck once, precise and perfect. Vergath froze. His blades clattered to the ground. He fell to his knees, then forward onto the arena floor. The great champion was defeated. The arena was absolutely silent. Lavra stepped back from the fallen warrior. She was breathing harder now, but she stood tall. She looked up at the observation platform, directly at Warlord Crixton. She did not need to speak. The duel had spoken for her. Crixton rose from his seat. Every eye in the arena turned to him. For a long moment, he simply looked at the small human who had done the impossible. Then he made his announcement. The flagship would respond to the distress signal. They would save the mining colony. And more than that, the human female had earned a place of honor. She would serve as his personal combat advisor, the first non-Zervani to hold such a position. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some protested, but the decision was made. Warlord's word was law. Jake ran down to the arena floor. He wrapped his arms around Lavra and held her tight. He was crying and did not care who saw. She held him back. She whispered that she had told him to trust her. She said they had work to do now. 3,000 people were counting on them. The flagship changed course immediately. They traveled at maximum speed toward the besieged colony. During the journey, Crixton called Lara to the command deck for strategic planning. The situation at the colony was bad. The raiders from the Endless Dark had fortified their position. They were using the colonists as shields. A direct assault would save the colony, but kill hundreds of innocent people. The Zolvani officers proposed traditional tactics. Overwhelming force. Acceptable casualties. Victory at any cost. Lavra proposed something different. She had studied the Endless Dark during the journey. They were not loyal soldiers. They were criminals who worked together only for profit. Their leadership was concentrated on a single command vessel. Remove that vessel, and the raiders would scatter. She suggested a surgical strike. A small team would infiltrate the command vessel, while the main fleet provided a distraction. Jake would coordinate communications with the colonists, keeping them calm and gathering intelligence. Lara would lead the infiltration team. Crixton listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked who would serve on this infiltration team. Lara asked for volunteers. 5 Zervani warriors stepped forward. Warriors who had watched her fight. Warriors who wanted to learn what she could teach them. Crixton approved the plan. The operation began 12 hours later. The Zorvani fleet emerged from hyperspace near the colony, weapons blazing. The raiders scrambled to respond, pulling ships from the orbital blockade to face this new threat. In the chaos, a small shuttle slipped through undetected. Lavra and her team docked with the raider command vessel and began their silent work. Jake worked from the flagship's communication center, talking to frightened colonists, gathering information about raider positions, relaying everything to Laura's team. He had never felt so useful or so terrified. Every minute that passed was a minute something could go wrong. Laura moved through the enemy ship like a ghost. She had taught her Zolvani team the basics of stealth, how to move without sound, how to strike without warning. They were not perfect, but they were good enough. They disabled security systems. They neutralized guards one by one. They worked their way toward the command center, leaving unconscious bodies in their wake. The raider leadership never saw them coming. When Lara gave the signal, her team struck. The command center fell in seconds. The raider captains were captured before they could send a warning. Without leadership, without coordination, the remaining raiders panicked. Some tried to flee. Some surrendered. Within hours, the colony was free. 3,000 lives saved. Not a single colonist killed. When the shuttle returned to the flagship, Crixton was waiting in the docking bay. He walked directly to Lara and performed a gesture Jake had never seen before. The warlord lowered his head slightly, a sign of respect reserved only for equals. He spoke quietly, so only Lara and Jake could hear. He said he had spent his entire life believing that strength was everything. He said humans had taught him something different. Strength without wisdom was just destruction. Victory without honor was just murder. He said he was glad he had been proven wrong. Lavra accepted his words with grace. She said strength and wisdom worked better together. She said the Zervani and humans could learn much from each other. For the first time since they had boarded this ship, Jake felt like the mission might actually succeed. Not just survive, but truly succeed. The future was beginning to look different. 6 months had passed since the mining colony rescue. The Zervani flagship had become something no one had expected, a place where humans and aliens worked side by side as equals. Jake stood at the observation window, watching stars drift past in the endless dark. He remembered arriving on this ship, terrified and unwanted, expecting to fail. Now he was respected. Now he was needed. Now he was home. His diplomatic work had finally found its purpose. He had written protocols for human-Zervani cooperation that were being adopted across the entire coalition. He had established communication channels between species that had never trusted each other before. He had proven that words could build bridges as strong as any weapon. Other Zervani commanders had begun requesting human liaisons for their own ships. What had started as one unwanted assignment had grown into a movement. Humans and Zervani were learning that they were stronger together than apart. Lavra had become a legend. Zervani warriors traveled from distant sectors just to train with her. They came expecting to learn combat techniques. They left understanding something much deeper. She taught them that victory did not require overwhelming force. She taught them that patience and intelligence were weapons as deadly as any blade. She taught them that the smallest warrior could defeat the largest enemy if they knew how dot in return. The Zervani taught her their ancient traditions. She learned their combat forms, their philosophy of war, their codes of honor that stretched back thousands of years. She wove these lessons into her own style, becoming something entirely new. A fighter who combined the best of both species. Warlord Crixton had changed most of all. The cold, dismissive commander Jake had met on that first day was gone. In his place was a leader who listened, who considered, who valued counsel from anyone who earned his respect. He still commanded with absolute authority. But now that authority was tempered by wisdom. He sought Jake's advice on diplomatic matters, asking questions about coalition politics and human customs. He sparred with Lavra weekly, brutal sessions that left both of them bruised and breathing hard. These matches had become something like friendship, a mutual respect built on honest competition. One evening, as the flagship orbited a peaceful world, a messenger arrived at Jake's quarters. Warlord Crix then requested their presence in his private chambers. Both of them. Immediately, Jake and Laura exchanged a look. In 6 months, they had never been invited to the warlord's private space. It was an honor reserved for family. They followed the messenger through corridors they had never walked before. The walls here were decorated differently, covered in personal trophies and ancient symbols. This was Crixton's true home, the place where the warlord became simply a person. Crixton waited for them in a room filled with strange artifacts from countless worlds. He stood by a window that looked out on the stars, his massive form silhouetted against the light. He spoke without turning around. He told them a story. When they had first arrived, he said, he had planned to kill them within the month. He had expected the human liaison to be weak, useless, a burden to be eliminated at the first opportunity. He had expected the female to be nothing more than a distraction. He had been completely wrong. He turned to face them. His 4 eyes, too organic and too mechanical, studied them with an expression Jake had learned to read over months of interaction. It was warmth. It was gratitude. It was something like love. He told them what he had observed. He had watched Jake work tirelessly despite constant rejection. He had seen the human diplomat return to his task every single day, refusing to give up, refusing to surrender to doubt. That persistence had impressed him more than any display of strength. He had watched Lara fight with skill and honor against every disadvantage. He had seen her risk her life for strangers, prove herself against his greatest champion, and change the minds of warriors who had dismissed humans for generations. That courage had taught him what humans were truly capable of. He had watched them love each other in a way that transcended their short lives. Humans live less than a century. Giovanni lived for many more. Yet the bond between Jake and Lara burned brighter than anything he had witnessed in his long existence. That devotion had shown him what he had been missing. Humans were not weak, he said. They were merely small. Their strength lay elsewhere, in their hearts, in their minds, in their refusal to accept defeat, even when all logic said they should surrender. He walked to a cabinet and removed two objects. They were blades, curved and beautiful, forged from metal that seemed to glow with inner light. He explained their significance. These weapons were made from the hull of his first command vessel, a ship he had captained when he was young and foolish. He had carried a blade from that ship for his entire career. It was the most precious thing he owned. Now he presented one blade to Jake and one to Lara. These were symbols of brotherhood, he said. They were given only to those the warlord considered family. In all his years of command, he had given such blades to only 4 others. Jake and Lara made 6. Jake accepted his blade with trembling hands. The weight of it, the meaning of it, was almost too much to process. He had come to this ship as an outsider. Now he was family. Lara accepted her blade with a small smile. She understood the honor being offered. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect she had learned from Giovanni culture. Crixton made a final pronouncement. His voice filled the room with quiet power. The galaxy was full of threats, he said. There were enemies who believed that might alone determine survival. There were civilizations that saw conquest as the only path forward. There were dangers that no single species could face alone. Those enemies were wrong. The future did not belong to the strongest or the largest or the most ruthless. The future belonged to those who could adapt, who could learn, who could find strength in unexpected places. The future belonged to those who understood that the smallest warrior could change the course of history. The future, he declared, belonged to humanity. Jake felt tears on his face. He did not try to hide them. This moment deserved tears. Lara took his hand and squeezed it gently. She looked at him with eyes that held both love and steel, the same eyes that had seen him through every challenge of the past 6 months. They had come to this ship hoping to survive. They had achieved something far greater. They had built a bridge between worlds, proven that humans deserved their place among the stars, and changed the mind of the most feared warlord in the galaxy. This was not the end of their story. This was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, more minds to change. The work of building a true alliance between species would take years, perhaps generations, but standing in that room, holding blades forged from history and given in brotherhood, Jake knew they were ready. He looked at his wife, the small woman with gray eyes who had defeated giants and saved colonies and earned the respect of warriors throughout the sector. He asked her what came next. She smiled. She said they would figure it out together, the same way they had figured out everything else. Together. That word meant more now than it ever had before. Together with each other. Together with the Giovanni. Together with everyone who believed that cooperation was stronger than conflict. The flagship moved through space toward new adventures, new challenges, new chances to prove what humans could do. Jake watched the stars through the window and felt something he had not felt since boarding this ship all those months ago. He felt hope. And hope, he understood now, was the most human thing of all.